The neighborhood was a carefully constructed illusion of peace, its streets lined with manicured lawns, perfectly trimmed hedges, and rows of identical houses designed to blend into one another. At first glance, it looked like the kind of place where life was calm, orderly, and uneventful, but beneath that polished surface lay something else: control. The Homeowners Association was the true power here, and at the center of it all stood Karen, the self-proclaimed guardian of the neighborhood's standards. It was early December when the first signs of rebellion appeared. One homeowner, an ordinary man with a quiet love for the holidays, decided to brighten up his house with Christmas lights. At first, it was simple: a string of lights along the roof, a glowing reindeer on the lawn, a few twinkling bushes. Nothing outrageous, just enough to remind him of the joy the season once brought when he was a child. The lights flickered on one chilly evening, casting a warm glow against the dark sky. Children passing by stopped to stare in delight. Parents smiled, grateful for something cheerful in a neighborhood that often felt suffocated by rules. The house became a small beacon of holiday spirit, but not everyone was pleased. To Karen, those lights were more than just decorations. They were defiance. They broke the HOA's strict guidelines about modesty in seasonal displays, and for Karen, whose entire sense of identity was bound to enforcing rules, that was unacceptable. Within days, a notice arrived at the man's home. It was curt, formal, and threatening. A fine had been issued for violating HOA policy. Remove the lights immediately or face escalating penalties. To most homeowners, this would have been enough. The HOA wielded real power: financial penalties, legal threats, and the ability to make life miserable for anyone who dared to resist. Most people complied. Most people gave in. But this man was different. As he stood outside his house that night, watching the lights glow softly against the winter sky, he felt something stir within him. The fine was not just about the lights. It was about control. It was about someone telling him he couldn't spread joy, couldn't bring warmth to a cold neighborhood, couldn't celebrate in his own way. And he wasn't willing to let that stand. The fines kept coming. Karen strutted past his house daily, clipboard in hand, smirking as she jotted down notes. Neighbors whispered, some fearful, others curious, wondering how far he would go. But instead of backing down, he felt his resolve harden. If Karen wanted a battle over Christmas lights, then she would get one. But it would not be the small, quiet battle she expected. No, this would become something much larger. The idea came to him slowly, then all at once. If Karen thought his lights were excessive, then he would show her what excessive truly meant. If she wanted to fight against joy, then he would drown her in it. He would not just decorate his house. He would transform it into the brightest, most spectacular display the neighborhood, the city, maybe even the entire county had ever seen. The next morning, deliveries began arriving. Boxes of lights, inflatables, glowing figures, projectors, and decorations piled up on his driveway. He spent hours outside, climbing ladders, hammering, wiring, and arranging. The once modest house slowly evolved into something extraordinary. Karen noticed immediately. She stormed through the neighborhood, warning residents that this spectacle would ruin property values, disturb the peace, and invite chaos. She sent out stern emails, rallied the HOA board, and tried to intimidate anyone who expressed admiration for the display. But even as she grew louder, her control began to slip. Because the truth was simple. People loved the lights. Children gathered in front of the house, pointing and laughing. Families drove from other streets just to see the growing spectacle. Social media posts began to circulate, and word spread beyond the neighborhood. What started as a small act of defiance was becoming something bigger, something Karen could no longer contain. But Karen didn't give up. She doubled down, filing more fines, threatening legal action, even attempting to involve the police. Yet every attempt seemed to backfire. Authorities dismissed her complaints, neighbors began to roll their eyes at her obsession, and slowly but surely the neighborhood's loyalty shifted. The man knew then that the battle lines had been drawn. This was no longer just about Christmas lights. It was about freedom versus control, joy versus oppression, defiance versus dominance. And as he looked at his glowing house brighter each night, he smiled. Because deep down, he knew the fight had only just begun. The notice was only the beginning. Karen, emboldened by what she saw as a clear violation of the HOA's sacred rules, began her campaign with renewed energy. To her, the single string of lights was not just decoration, it was a challenge, a provocation, and a chance to prove that she alone controlled the neighborhood's order. The man, however, had quietly resolved not to bend. He left the lights up, then added a few more strands across his front bushes. The twinkle spread wider, tiny sparks of color against the early winter darkness. What might have gone unnoticed in another community was, under Karen's watch, an unforgivable act. She wasted no time escalating her efforts. The following week, the HOA's mailboxes carried a second letter, sharper in tone. This time it demanded immediate removal and payment of an increased fine. Neighbors whispered as they pulled the papers from their slots, shaking their heads. Some avoided eye contact with him, fearful of associating themselves with what Karen called non-compliance. Others offered knowing smiles, quietly approving of his defiance. But Karen was not satisfied with fines alone. She began knocking on doors, clipboard in hand, gathering signatures for a petition to enforce stricter holiday decoration rules. Her words dripped with urgency, painting the lights as a dangerous precedent. If one homeowner was allowed to rebel, she warned, soon the neighborhood would collapse into chaos. Inflatable snowmen would sprout like weeds, musical displays would blare at all hours, order would vanish. It wasn't long before she took her campaign beyond paperwork. Karen appeared on the man's lawn one chilly evening, pacing at the edge of his property like a sentinel. She jotted notes, snapping photographs of each glowing bulb, as though building a case for court. Her presence did not go unnoticed. Children on their way home from sledding slowed their steps, staring curiously. Cars rolled by, their drivers watching the strange standoff. The man remained inside, quietly watching from behind his curtains, more resolved than ever. As the days passed, her strikes multiplied. She called the HOA board members one by one, pressuring them with stories of safety hazards. She wrote emails late into the night, warning of falling property values. She even tried to involve the local fire department, claiming the extra lights were a risk. Each attempt left behind a paper trail, a thickening file of complaints that grew as her obsession deepened. Yet something unexpected began to stir. The man's small display, now doubling in size with every passing evening, drew attention not just from neighbors, but from passers-by. A family out for a walk stopped to admire the cheerful lights, their children giggling in delight. A couple paused to take photographs, their breath visible in the cold air. Soon, cars began slowing down at the corner, headlights briefly illuminating the house before moving on. The spectacle was modest by most standards, but in this controlled community it felt rebellious, almost radical, and with every light that twinkled, Karen's fury grew. On the third week of December, she escalated her assault to the highest level. A special HOA meeting was convened, called with only one purpose, to address the Christmas light problem. The man's name was listed on the agenda, his home the subject of scrutiny. Karen, at the head of the table, presented her case with the zeal of a prosecutor. Photographs flashed across her laptop screen, angles of the house glowing against the night, each one accompanied by long paragraphs of complaints. Her voice carried through the hall as she spoke of rule violations, safety risks, and the decay of order. Some board members nodded, others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few dared to question whether her vendetta was truly in the community's best interest, but Karen silenced them with the force of her conviction. To her, there was no middle ground. Either the lights went, or the neighborhood lost all control. Meanwhile, at the man's home, new packages arrived daily. Long cardboard boxes filled with strings of bulbs, shimmering icicles, and colorful displays leaned against his porch. He worked quietly, methodically, unfazed by the storm gathering around him. Each night his house grew brighter. Each evening the street became more alive. Karen's campaign of control was only fueling his determination. And though she believed she was tightening her grip, she was in fact loosening it. The more she struck, the more resistance she inspired. Neighbors who once stayed silent now whispered of standing up. Some even began adding small lights of their own, timid sparks of rebellion that flickered in windows and along fences. By Christmas week, the tension had reached a breaking point. Karen's letters had stacked high, her threats louder than ever. The board had yet to issue a final ruling, torn between her fury and the growing wave of community support for the display. As the man plugged in another row of shimmering bulbs, the street seemed to glow brighter than it ever had. Karen watched from across the cul-de-sac, fists clenched, face lit in the reflection of his defiance. She had struck in every way she could, but the battle was far from over. The stage was set for escalation. Her strikes had been met with resilience, her fury with light. The conflict, once confined to a single yard, was now spreading across the entire neighborhood. And in the cold December air, one truth became clear. Karen was not done yet. Her greatest attacks were still to come. The man's quiet rebellion had already outgrown its beginnings. What started as a single string of lights had multiplied into glowing bushes, shimmering rooflines, and twinkling icicles dangling like frozen stars. By the end of the second week, his house had become a beacon, a splash of color against the monotone backdrop of the neighborhood's controlled uniformity. But expansion was inevitable. The battle was no longer simply about his yard. It was about freedom, defiance, and spirit. And so while Karen sharpened her threats, he sharpened his vision. Deliveries began arriving daily, larger than before. Trucks idled at the curb, unloading boxes filled with elaborate displays, candy canes taller than children, reindeer glowing with warm white light, and wreaths so wide they could span an entire garage door. Each evening, under the fading glow of dusk, he worked with quiet determination. Power cords snaked across the lawn like hidden rivers, connecting strand after strand, each bulb a statement of resistance. Neighbors watched in awe. The spectacle grew from decoration to phenomenon. Cars no longer just slowed to glance. They stopped altogether, families piling out to admire the glowing wonderland. Children pointed in excitement, their laughter rising above the crisp night air. Parents pulled out phones to capture the moment, the clicks of cameras blending with the soft hum of the lights. Karen seethed. From her porch across the cul-de-sac, she monitored every addition like a general tracking enemy forces. Each reindeer that appeared was another act of war. Each glowing strand of bulbs was another strike against her authority. Her clipboard now bulged with documents, photographs, and complaints, each one marked with furious notes. She fired off emails with subject lines filled with capital letters, pressing the HOA board to act before things spiraled completely out of control. But control was slipping away from her. The expansion was not contained to one home. Slowly, timidly at first, neighbors began joining in. A single string of lights on a mailbox here, a glowing wreath on a door there. Some dared to outline their roofs, soft glimmers that flickered in the night. Karen's grip weakened with every bulb that flickered to life beyond the man's property line. By mid-December, the man's house was unrecognizable. Every edge glowed, every surface shimmered. The bushes pulsed with strands of red and green. The driveway arches sparkled as though kissed by frost. His roofline was crowned with glowing snowflakes that winked down at the crowds below. And then came the centerpiece, a towering Christmas tree, not real but constructed from cascading strings of light, rose from the center of his yard. It climbed high above the roof, visible from blocks away, its colors shifting in patterns that mesmerized onlookers. It wasn't just decoration, it was a declaration. Crowds gathered nightly. Cars lined the streets, headlights blinking as they idled in makeshift rows. People walked shoulder to shoulder along the sidewalks, drawn to the brilliance. Vendors began to notice the opportunity, parking food carts nearby to sell hot chocolate and roasted chestnuts. The once quiet cul-de-sac had transformed into a carnival of light. Karen tried everything to stop it. She called the city, citing traffic congestion and safety hazards. She complained about noise, about litter left behind by visitors, about headlights shining late into the night. But the city, overwhelmed by the positivity spreading through the community, hesitated. What she called chaos, others called celebration. What she called disruption, others called joy. The more she fought, the larger the expansion became. Local newspapers began to catch on. A photographer arrived one evening, capturing the glowing house against the starless December sky. Within days, the image appeared on a community news site, the headline praising the spectacle of light, bringing cheer to the town. Social media posts multiplied, each tagged with excited captions, each video showing cars honking in support, each comment cheering the defiant homeowner. And so, what had begun as one man's quiet resistance became something far larger, a movement of light against the grey weight of control. Karen's frustration reached a fever pitch. To her, the neighborhood was slipping through her fingers. Order was dissolving. She had called meeting after meeting, but the board was faltering under the public attention. Some members, weary of her constant tirades, began to distance themselves. Others quietly admitted they admired the display, even if they dared not say so publicly. The expansion had shifted the balance. What was once a fight between one man and one woman was now a clash between two forces: joy and control, celebration and restriction, community and authority. By Christmas Eve, the street looked nothing like the strict beige uniformity Karen had defended for years. It glowed like a fairground, each house adding its own sparkle in solidarity. The man's house remained the centerpiece, its towering light tree dominating the night, but it was no longer alone. The expansion had spread beyond 1 yard. It had infected the entire neighborhood with light. And as Karen stood at her window, glaring through the glass at the sea of brightness, she realized the truth she had feared most. She was losing. But Karen was not finished. Not yet. The expansion had challenged her, but she still had weapons left to wield. And in her mind, one last strike could restore the order she had fought to protect. The Battle of Christmas Lights was far from over.